Buenos días a todos y bienvenidos al webinar de hoy,
Good
Optimización
morning, everybody. Welcome to our seminar, Optimizing Subsidies to Foster Sustainable Housing Solutions. This is the third webinar on the strategies to foster social housing in cities across Latin America and the Caribbean. My name is Maria Camila Uribe. I am very pleased to speak and to open this workshop, how to use urban land to promote social housing. Before we start our webinar, let me tell you that we will be holding this in Spanish and English and Portuguese, so you can choose the language of your choice because we have simultaneous interpretation. You just have to click on the world icon, as you can see it here on the screen, then go to the bottom part and choose the language of choice.
down on your screen. Você pode escolher o idioma da sua preferência no símbolo do mundo na parte de baixo del menú. En caso de tener
In
alguna
case of questions for the panel members, you can ask your questions through the Q&A uh, session in Zoom, and the panel members will take your questions at the end of the session. Allow me to remind you that this webinar will be recorded and it will be available on YouTube channel of the IBDB next week. We will also share the link in the chat, the link for our YouTube channel. For those who join us for the first time, may I say that the IDB Cities Network is a platform to promote the sharing of knowledge and good practices in cities across Latin America and the Caribbean, because the multi national character of this, we also foster collaboration from the public sector, the private, and the academy in more than 250 cities. We want to strengthen leadership in urban management. We want to promote the building of capacities for municipality officials and also to foster synergies in our allies and in the cooperating institutions.
tiene 4
This
series.
year, our schedule for webinars includes 4 series. The first series already took place, strategies to foster social housing in cities across Latin America and Caribbean. The first 2 webinars were already done and they are available in YouTube. This is the second series that we're ending today, strategies to foster social housing in cities across Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is to close the housing cycle. After or later this year, we will have strategies to fight pollution in the cities of Latin America. And in October, this will be the fourth series of the year, we'll speak about strategies for biodiverse and resilient cities across Latin America and the Caribbean. We are going to take advantage of La COP that will take place in our region. For invitations and to receive the links for registration, please subscribe to our newsletter through the link that we're sharing in the chat. There you can check also for the blogs and posts published in the webpage. So let us move on to the main topic for today, housing. We have already discussed the challenges in the cities in Latin America and the Caribbean in the struggle against inequalities. We have also talked about the generation of soil or land accessible for housing in the cities. And in the first webinar of this series, we also spoke about the importance of planning and redensification for land use for social housing. We also discussed the importance of leadership from the local governments coordination with national governments, and the work with the private sector. We also discussed in the first seminar some of the instruments that municipalities have available to promote housing, such as the application of land use standards for a more compact city, adding in comprehensive planning using fiscal lands very well identified. And also, in the second webinar last week, we talked about other topics, accessibility, and also land banks and soil banks as instruments. We also learned about key elements for a good implementation of policies and how to improve public and private work. Today, we're going to speak about subsidies, optimizing subsidies to foster sustainable housing solutions. We'll speak about the importance of the design of subsidies programs, re-engineering of subsidies using score-based systems. The use of score-based systems allows that resources are allocated to those who need it the most. We're going to speak about the programs of subsidies, considering the incentives that are needed for the different types of housing. We will speak about setting specific goals to maximize or to optimize success. Well-designed programs improve accessibility and the quality of housing. We want sustainable and inclusive housing. Inclusion will be based on how to improve efficiency and equity in the allocation of subsidies. We are going to promote social inclusion, economic inclusion, thus ensuring that housing meets the habitability standards, accessibility, and energy efficiency standards. Today, we will hear about cases of cities in Mexico and in Chile. They will tell us about their experience. We hope this experience will be of inspiration to find effective solutions to improve the quality of life in every city in the region. Today, the structure for our discussion will be the following. The moderator will be Paloma Silva. She is a lead specialist of the Housing and Urban Development Division. We will have two experts, Claudia Macalais, the Housing and Urban Development Consultant, and also Maria Huck-Smith, the International Director of the Housing Finance Program of the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. In the second part, we will have Larissa Mora. She's a Senior Manager of Assessment of Information of Infonavit. She will share the Mexican experience in implementation of housing subsidies. And then we will have Fernando Jimenez, the head of the Housing Project Management Office of Chile. He will share the experience of Chile in the implementation of housing subsidies. And this will be complemented by Lorena Núñez, who is the head of the Housing Department and the municipal sponsoring entity of the municipality of Renca in Chile. She will share the experience of the Renta municipality in the implementation of housing subsidies. And last but not least, we will close by answering the questions you may have. So I encourage you to listen to the speakers and to make questions through the chat functionality. We hope this will be a very interesting and useful session for everybody. I'd like to ask you please to scan this QR code, and then we will ask the first questions. What housing subsidies do you know are being implemented in your city? So please scan this QR code so we can get your answers in the screen. What are the subsidies that you know that are being implemented in your city? That's our first question.
Bueno, mira, cada vez más fuerte. Mejoramiento, arriendo, propiedad,
Well,
además
we
del
have improvements, ownership, rental, non interest rate subsidies,
subsidio a la vivienda
supply
interestatal,
subsidy, subsidies to social housing,
interés preferencial. En Costa Rica,
preferential
B,
interest,
B, BFB.
BFV, Costa Rica.
Bueno, ahí vamos teniendo las respuestas. Creo que van a ser
So
interesantes
these are the
para
answers.
nuestra conversación del
This is
día de
going
hoy.
to be
Vamos a
very
empezar a
interesting
preguntar,
for today's
¿qué elementos
discussion.
considera que
Second
serían
question,
esenciales para asegurar una efectiva
what
implementación de subsidios
elements are
habitacionales?
essential to ensure effective implementation of
Scanner la
housing subsidies?
pregunta para que puedan contestar
Please scan the
escaneando
question
el
and
código de
answer.
barra, por favor. ¿Qué elementos considera que
I
son
repeat, what
esenciales
elements do you
para la
believe are
efectiva
essential to
implementación de
ensure
subsidios
effective
habitacionales?
implementation of housing
Datos,
subsidies?
demanda, focalización,
We have data, supply
multiplicar
and
impacto,
demand, focus,
demanda, diagnósticos,
diagnosis,
focalización, voluntad
demand,
política,
political freedom,
coordinación,
coordination, political will, sorry, coordination,
focalización. Bueno, pues muy interesantes
location,
las
very
respuestas.
interesting.
Bueno, creo que con esta agenda tan nutrida y
Well,
con
we have
esta
a very
conversación tan
good
interesante que
agenda,
tuvimos hoy, quisiera
and
darle
it
la
seems the
bienvenida
discussion is
a
going to
Paloma
be
Silva,
highly interesting. Now,
moderadora
I
de
would
nuestro
like to
foro.
give the
Muchas
floor
gracias,
to
Paloma, por
Paloma
venir.
Silva to be the moderator. Welcome, Paloma.
Gracias a ti, María Camila, y
Thank
muchas
you,
gracias
Maria
a nuestros
Kalima.
flamantes speakers
Thank
del
you
día
very
de hoy.
much to all the speakers that will be presenting
Realmente
today.
ha sido un placer el poder
It's been a
trabajar
great
en el grupo
pleasure
de
to
vivienda
work
con la red de
from the
ciudades,
housing group with
porque
the
pues hemos encontrado
network of
que en esta
cities,
nueva estrategia de atención al
because in
déficit
this new
habitacional,
strategy
en la
to
cual
fight
no comenzamos
housing
una operación sin
deficit,
apenas hacer un real diagnóstico
we don't
del
start our
déficit
work
habitacional
until
en
we
nuestro
do a
país,
good
aparte
assessment
estamos
of
trabajando con todos los
housing
institutos de
deficit.
estadística
By the way, we're
de
working with the
Latinoamérica y el Caribe para
statistical
mejorar los
teams
censos y las
of Latin
encuestas de
America and the
barrios,
Caribbean to
mejores
improve
análisis
our
de los déficits
census
que hemos
of
y a
households to
partir de
better
ahí estudios
analyze
de cadena de valor
the
en los
housing
cuales de hecho podría
deficit.
Gladys
We
participar
have done studies
y
also of
varios
chain
amigos
value,
nuestros
of the value of
que
change,
hemos
sorry.
encontrado en este estudio de
And we
cadena
have
de valor
found in our
que
study
Chile
of
en
the
10
change
países con más
value
de
that we
300
conducted
diferentes
in
stakeholders
10
relevantes de la
countries
región,
and with more than
los
300
retos
stakeholders in the
relacionados
region, we
suelen
have
verlos
found
más
challenges
relacionados
related
con
to
los
land
subsidios y los programas de
and to
financiamiento que están siendo
subsidies
impulsados por los
and
gobiernos.
financing programs
Como
fostered
ustedes
by the
saben,
governments.
el déficit
As you
habitacional
know,
en la
the
región
housing
es de
deficit
gran
in the region
relevancia.
is
En muchos
quite
países
relevant.
tenemos bonos
In many
demográficos en
countries,
donde
we
hay un
have
déficit
demographic
habitacional de
bonuses
más o menos 45%
in a
de
deficit
los
of
hogares en
around
América Latina y el
45% of
Caribe.
households in
Y en
the Latin
adición,
America and the Caribbean. And to
la
that,
formación de hogares
we
con
add
bonos demográficos.
those
Pero
households that
además de
have
ello, también tenemos en
demographic
Chile, en
bonuses.
adición al déficit habitacional,
And in
más del
addition to the
21% de la
housing
población urbana en
deficit,
América Latina y el Caribe
21% of
vive en
urban
situación
population
informal,
in
es
Latin
decir,
America and Caribbean
120 millones
live
de
in
personas.
informal settlements.
Sabemos que
That means
el déficit
150 million
significativamente
people.
mayor que el
The
déficit
qualitative
cuantitativo
deficit
por esta
is
baja
higher than the
producción de suelo
quantitative
y
one
porque los
because of the low
subsidios y los
production of land and
financiamientos
because
no
of
son bien
subsidies and
dirigidos a la
finance are
población
not well
que
directed
realmente
to the
lo necesita.
population
Y
or well
esto, bueno, pues
allocated to
porque
those who need
también
it.
un reto es que
And this is a
53% de los
challenge. And
trabajadores
in
en
addition,
América Latina y el
53%
Caribe
of workers in Latin
pertenecen a
America and
sectores
the
formales,
Caribbean
tienen
are
barreras
in the
financieras e institucionales
informal
y sabemos
sector.
que
They
esto
have
hace que los
institutional
recursos
barriers, and
fiscales
we know that
sean
fiscal
insuficientes para
resources are
poder
not enough
responder.
to
Entonces,
be able
realmente
to
los
solve that.
subsidios se han convertido en una herramienta muy poderosa por parte de los gobiernos para hacer política pública y para detonar inversión privada. El objetivo del panel del día de hoy es ver cómo estos subsidios se pueden dirigir a vivienda vinculada con la ciudad, a soluciones de vivienda más asequibles y accesibles, a
and more
soluciones
accessible, and a solution of housing
déficit
that will
habitacional. Me
reduce
refiero a
the
soluciones de vivienda que
housing
no
deficit.
solamente
I
satisfacen
refer to this because
derechos
it's not
humanos, sino
only
también
to
vivienda digna. Esto que se
acquire
le llama
new housing.
ejercicios de
We
co-living,
are doing some
soluciones
exercises
de
of
vida digna
co-living,
para adultos
Mr.
mayores,
Living, senior living,
remodelación,
for
remodelación,
elderly, remodeling,
vivienda en renta,
self-production,
diferentes soluciones de las cuales
renting,
estaremos
different
platicando el día
solutions
de hoy
where we will be
con
talking
Marja,
today
con
together
Claudia,
with Marja and Claudia.
expertas
as international experts to whom we thank them a lot for being here. That's will be practical cases where IDB has tried to diversify its financing products, and we will analyze the Chilean cases too. In that regard, I would like to start by asking Maya Joek. You already know that we have first level speakers in the chat. You see the resumes in order not to repeat it, and on the contrary, take a good use of the time. I like this webinar to be where we have a high presence of women because for Marta, we have the following questions. How do you think the subsidy programs should be designed, take into account the renting housing with regards to owning the housing? We want to promote the renting because many centennials and millennials are looking for this type of solution, but also the elderly. In which do you think are the key objects for each type of program? So welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Paloma, for inviting me to this very interesting series of seminars. This last one, subsidies, I know is going to be the most contentious, the most difficult. Subsidies, there's nothing easy about subsidies. It's always the most difficult part. Land we can deal with, but with subsidies, it is a different matter. Let me step back and bring us back to the global level. A lot of improvement has been made in the policy environment, including in subsidies, to make subsidies work better with the financial system, to make subsidies more friendly for local governments to deal with. There is a much more realistic segmentation, as Paloma just mentioned, of the groups that are underserved in society. And we know we need rental, we need for the elderly, we have a much better understanding that one shoe does not fit all. And I think globally, a lot of progress has been made. So the understanding that we need rental, that we need ownership not only for the final home, but for getting people on the ladder is much better understood. The other thing is that a lot of progress has been made in on the finance side, and to make subsidies work better with finance. Infonavit is a good example of an institution that has made big progress in adjusting the subsidy system so that it can be replenishing on subsidy funds from the capital markets. That is another link, and that's all much better understood. So a lot of progress. But at the same time, when I look at the global picture and I look at all the data globally, including in Latin America, we see that the house price to income ratio across the world has worsened enormously. That means that affordability from the United States to countries in Latin America, and particularly sub-Saharan Africa, that the affordability has decreased as one indicator. So the house price to income ratio is under enormous stress. That means that there is more stress on providing subsidies. When that ratio goes up globally, you know that in each and every country, there is going to be a conversation about more subsidies and how can we better subsidize. So that is the larger picture. Now, let's then move to the subsidy perspective in Latin America. Latin America is more centralized in its subsidy provision than most regions in the world. And that has historical reasons because of the macroeconomy in the 60s, 70s, and so on. So in many Latin American countries, the subsidy policy is highly centralized. And there is a tension, therefore, between the national main programs for subsidies at the national level and what are the requirements to move affordable housing, particularly social housing, at the local government level. And that tension is very palpable, particularly in Latin America. So there is that tension. And the challenge in most of Latin America, but also elsewhere, is how do you create a subsidy policy that is suitable for providing incentives for the right type of housing at the local level, with national level, more general subsidy programs. And at the local level, of course, the demand for subsidies is very diverse. It is not just ownership, as we already discussed, it is rental, it is incremental housing, it is home improvement. There's a great and enormous diversity of housing segments that require subsidies in order for them to go to scale and to reach the right income level or the right social category of people. And how you match that the national programs with the diverse demand at the local level is a big challenge. Also, the national policies have focused mostly, not entirely, but mostly on finance. The financial incentives are the easiest for a national program to design and to provide. So nearly all national programs focus on down payment subsidies, interest rate subsidies, so subsidies through the financial mechanisms. But as we have seen from now many global studies, the challenges are more on the supply side and not so much on finance on the supply side, but on the real side, on land, on all these other factors that make the housing markets not function. So when I look at the global figures and I look at the house price to income ratio that I just talked about, and that has worsened across countries and globally, what I see, and there is a very good study by the Bank of International Settlements, which I mentioned because it is so unique for the Bank of International Settlements to even think of supply side. They only think of the banking system, financial stability, and all those kinds of things. But in the housing sector, which is very important for them to look at because of financial stability issues, they have understood that it is not the interest rate or the cost of finance that make this ratio, this affordability ratio, house price to income, doing so much worse across now several decades. What they discovered by combining a lot of different studies is that ratio is particularly impacted by a lack of supply, by supply inelasticity, as we call it. So if the supply in a certain municipality cannot expand according to the demands and the needs of the local municipality, the prices will increase. And prices will increase not just, they will increase relative to income. So these are the global facts, and they are very difficult to address from the perspective of a national housing policy. So that is where I wanted to begin. How can we attune our national subsidies to take care of the supply needs of the municipalities, so that can be incorporated. That normally these needs and the cost of providing housing, particularly rental housing, at the local level, that can be incorporated, not just for the origination of housing, the building of the construction of housing, but the maintenance. And this is particularly important when we talk about rental, because rental housing, particularly if it has a public component and it is not private, and for the lowest income groups, it's nearly always public, publicly provided, NGO provided rental housing. How do we compensate the local government, not just for the construction of these houses, but for the longer term maintenance? And this is an incredible tension. And I don't think that many countries have found a solution to that problem. And that is why we see the supply and demand side being out of whack, and prices and affordability, therefore, going out of sync in many countries. At the local government level, if I now switch back from the national picture and the tension with local, at the local government level, and you have talked about these issues in your previous seminars, local authorities have to put together location of land, transportation, and housing. If that triangle is broken, if you only look at cheap location, or if you only look at the transportation network, irrespective of location relative to employment, social services, and so on, you have to combine those three: location, transport, and housing. That triangle has to be there. How can we, at the central government level, where the subsidy pot is mostly located, stimulate local governments to do the right thing on all these three dimensions? And as I say, not just the short term, but the longer term. And that's particularly important for rental. So that is the challenge. And of course, when we at the central government level mostly focus on finance, we do not have the tools at the central government level to deal with subsidizing the supply side parts that need to be looked at and supported. And we need capacity building at the local level. So I'm very keen to listen to the case studies later on, and on what Claudia is going to talk about, the scoring system and how the scoring system can provide the incentives for local governments to move in the right direction. My hunch is that the scoring systems alone are insufficient, and we need a lot more than just scoring and financial incentives related to scoring to support a more holistic and comprehensive housing policy at the local government level. So I think I want to leave it there, and we can come back to any of those details later on, and I'm sure we will. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Marja. Muy interesante lo que nos comentas. Marja nos plantea
Thank you very much, Maria. Very interesting. As a matter of fact, a month ago, the IDB and partners from the USA, we did a seminar to discuss the main challenges in the region. We had a number of ministers from Latin America and the Caribbean joining us. And in all cases, including the USA, the big problem is the supply of housing, of affordable housing and of housing solutions. And as Maria said, location, transport, health, employment are key also. At the IDB, we have initiated some support to the region. We want to organize land banks with the national government because we need to provide affordable land for housing solutions, but we're also developing products to finance housing constructors, builders, because it is true, affordability of social housing is so important, and it has to be in alignment with the income of the population. There is a big inequality, and that's why there is such a huge housing deficit. These are just a few examples, and this is just food for thought. On July the 25th at Fonavit, we're going to hold an international housing conference. We will focus on the new range of subsidies and finance, and we will also speak about land. Today, it's a pleasure to have Claudia Magallanes with us. We have worked with her in Brazil, and through first loss warranty funds, we have tried to innovate in the subsidies. We want to cover a larger population. We did a first loss warranty program for improvements. So instead of reaching 14,000 families, we're going to reach over 150,000 households. Every time we speak of new strategies, I invite you to think in a disruptive manner. We cannot keep on doing business as usual and thinking we're going to get different results. Now, Claudia, you have reviewed a number of housing programs where new models are being designed on the basis of scoring. This is to promote equality, among other things. And also, this is to develop sound urban development policies. So I wonder what are the criteria, the factors that should be considered at the time of developing a scoring system.
Gracias a usted, Paloma. First of all,
Thank
I'd
you,
like to
Paloma.
thank Maria Camila, Paloma, and everyone else involved in promoting this series of webinars. Um, Also for inviting me to be a part of it. I'd like also to thank Maria. I must say that everything I know about subsidies, I learned from Maria. And we all owe her a great deal on that, on all the research that she has done, all the important research, and we all rely on that. So I feel that I should not be talking. I should give my time to Maria, but that's not the assignment. So let me share the screen here. I put some things just to please let me know if everybody can.
Yes, I can see it. However, if you can open it, please.
Yeah, sure. Now? Okay, so subsidies, as Maria mentioned, they must be effective, efficient, equitable, sustainable. And it's such a fundamental topic for Latin America and the Caribbean for the reasons we all know. And it's, as Maria said, a very complex topic. So subsidies should be explicit, transparent, and focused. Who are the target groups? Are subsidies actually reaching those groups? Subsidies should not replace the beneficiary's effective payment capacity. How much subsidy is actually needed? Because we deal all the time with limited resources. And I can talk on the Q&A time about our experience here in Brazil. In terms of how we can quickly run out of money to support subsidy policies. So for all of that, for subsidies to be effective, efficient, sustainable, equitable, we all, for all of that, we need criteria, of course. And so subsidies should promote access to adequate housing, as Paloma, Maria Camila, and Maria talked. So we are talking about security of tenure, quality standards, infrastructure, location, access to jobs, transportation services and equipment, sustainable and climate resilience. So score-based models allows for applying diverse criteria, allows us to induce the type of housing, the quality of housing that needs to be provided and accessed by households. But subsidy policy must also consider and mitigate the risks of causing market distortions. And we'll see how that applies to score-based models as well. So I brought a quote from Arya. So in order to design an effective housing subsidy policy, we need to be clear about the components of housing affordability and the specific problems in accessing finance and housing for different household groups in each country. Maria talked about that. And so to design efficient and equitable score-based models, we need data. We need data on households, on income, on indebtedness, on deficit and demand. There is a D missing. Deficit and demand. We need data on home prices, housing price indexes. We need data on land prices. We need data on construction licensing and registering costs. We data on housing supply, on secondary housing markets, on delinquency, foreclosure, and evictions to understand affordability in the long run, not only to access in the time that households access the house, the home, but also in the long run, their ability to stay in that housing. And location of jobs, equipments, and services. So designing efficient and equitable score-based models also need testing. We need to test the model and adjust the scores. And that's not a simple issue. We need to test for inequalities, for discontinuities, for regressiveness, and we need to monitor it. Because of the dynamics of the sector, we need to continuously monitor the model, the housing policy, and check for inefficiencies, for market distortions. And as we monitor, we need to recalibrate the scores, the weights, and so on. So Paloma asked about criteria and factors that can be used in score-based models. We start from the basic, the main ones: income and payment capacity. We need to understand that. Social criteria, priority groups. So who exactly do we need to prioritize for housing access for each type of program and housing solution that we are putting out? We need to check on affordability, especially when we talk about home ownership programs, home ownership solutions. Even if we design totally subsidized, like no cost housing, zero cost housing, because everything is subsidized. Even if we can't afford it in the long run, which generally we can't, we run out of money. But if we could, even though, is that solution really affordable for that family, for that household? Can they afford maintenance costs, housing related costs? So all that has to come into the equation. And also the other criteria and factors that can be used to provide the type of housing, the quality of housing that needs to be in place: intra-urban location and polycentric cities. Since many cities are now not only one center only anymore, neighborhood quality, equipments and services that must be available when we talk about urban life, transportation and mobility, access to jobs and all that, building design and quality standards, environmental sustainability, climate resilience factors. So all those factors can come in the score-based models. Yet, we need to carefully consider a lot of things when we are designing subsidy policies in general and score-based models in particular. So start from sound diagnosis. What is the problem that we are addressing? We need to know, as I mentioned, data. We need to know the problem very well. Consider research, literature, benchmarking as reference. Maria mentioned the work by the BIS. So there is a lot of research and literature, especially by Maria, and there's a lot of benchmarking. So we need to look at other experiences. Where have they failed? That's the most important lesson. Check if scores designed reflect the policy objectives. Because at the end of the day, that's what we want, right? The scores are here to help us achieve the policy objectives. Simulate the use of the model to make sure that criteria allows for target priority groups to be actually served and adequately served. Location-based criteria is something that we'll discuss a lot today, and it's something very important. But it's also something that we need to monitor closely, because it can be capitalized by the market in terms of price distortions. So use adequate data, align with master urban plan, zoning, and land use ordinances. So Maria talked about that, how local governments can be induced, incentivized by federal subsidy policies, but also how they have to respond in terms of subsidy policies to work effectively. Anticipate unintended outcomes. So adjust scores, weights, and monitor. Develop user-friendly tools that allow for potential beneficiaries to understand how the score works. Of course, the simpler the subsidy, the easier it is for everyone to understand. As we come up with more like with score-based models, with more elaborated models, it becomes less obvious. So we need to design tools that help beneficiaries understand how the score works to guarantee transparency and prevent information asymmetry. I think that's what I had for now. Once again, thank you so much for inviting me in this fundamental discussion. And I look forward to the next presentations.
Thank you very much, Claudia. It's very interesting what you are showing to us, the different factors that must be related with the subsidies and the very important tool that the governments have with this with this specific topic. También te quisiera preguntar, bueno, más adelante les vamos a hacer preguntas y respuestas, pero para que lo vayan pensando tú.
I'd also like to ask you, and this is also for Maria, start thinking about international examples, please, where this exercise has been done. Rental housing, land use, how scoring systems have been applied to those situations, please, later on.
Marja and Claudia are telling us that we, first of all, have to have a very good diagnosis. That's why we are adding in the census more granular question with regards to salary equality, income accounts, location of the housing deficit, because this type of products have to be assessed according to the countries and their realities. So also it's quite relevant to diversify the type of subsidies that we have to different type of solutions, depending on the demographics that the housing deficits have in each country. And now we will be talking about what's being done in Mexico and Chile. They've been fine-tuning through financing and subsidy questions in the countries. The challenge is not a lesser challenge. It's quite relevant to have this type of assessing with the stakeholders in the sector. That's why it is so important to have these studies to the value chain of each country with builders, with how banking, with cooperatives, with the social sector, cooperatives, and families to identify which are the subsidy products and financing products required in the different countries. Not to do it from the cabinet, and we're not doing it from Washington, but together with them to co-build these products. That's something that cannot be done from the different governments or from the national housing organizations. No, we need the feedback of the private sector and the social sector. So it will be products that will support the supply, as Marja well said it, and make more affordable the demand of families. So thank you very much. And later on, we will be with you, Marja and Claudia. It was very good what your topics, and now I'll take advantage. Marja, you are a reference for me, and I have learned a lot from you during my professional career. So now let us start talking about those practical cases that are already happening in the region. And I will take this opportunity to thank a lot Larissa and for her to be able to be here, Fernando and Lorena too. And then I would like to start with Larissa. These questions will be, although for the three of you, Marge already told us and Claudia about the importance of the subsidies and the financial incentives based on scores or any other type of indicators. How do you think you can promote strategies for social housing and to take advantage of your knowledge to tell us what criteria is it important to be included in a scoring model for allocation of a subsidy and housing financing, and what type of subsidy shall we have for rentings or rentals that will be in the Chilean case. There are very good examples that Fernando and Lore will talk about, but will allow us to have like a balance. And what Marta was saying, from a practical point of view, how can you better coordinate the local authority and the national government to ensure the effectiveness of programs regarding the housing deficit? So, Lari, you have the floor. I cannot hear her very well. Thank you very much. I would like to talk about some subsidy segments that we have through IDB. I'm not going to talk in depth how this works. In my presentation, there are the links. So for whomever is not familiar with the agreement, it will be easy for you. So this is what I consider it's interesting to have on the table. The first strategy that we have for social housing is the new loan scheme, because we come from history where the mortgage loans were based on minimum wages, and that's each making this grow unrealistically, but had no relationship with people earning more, because that was increasing, and to have the perception that the loans were unpayable. Later on in 2017, we started with the loan in pesos. This is the first approximation to had a fixed interest rate of 12%. And the example I'm stating is the new scheme of credits or loans in pesos. It has a progressive, which is on the right-hand side of the picture or your screens. We have dollars per month, reported by the employers of each of their employees, and the rate starts at 3.33% for those who have up to 372 minimum wage. This grows up until a fixed point of 10.45% of all those who have income or salary greater than 1,135 per month. But you can see the accumulated of the subsidy, and down here there are very little people who have $327, and it accumulates the distribution of the rate in order to have a mean of 8.4 and interest rate of 7.98. I would like to state as a reference for those of you who are not too familiar with this, was this is the central bank in Mexico, it's 11%. To have an average of 7.98 implies a subsidy, which is in the IDB through the informality, to be able to have at the financing moment to have an interest rate that it's feasible and affordable. And during the 30 average years that you have mortgage, uh, you can keep the subsidy rate. Also, as Paloma said, I would like to refer to the difficulties we are having in order to make this affordable. We have devoted ourselves to strengthen the type of options that we have within the market. For example, on this bar is the distribution of loans that we had since 2006 till 2012. We used to finance the new housing, and it required a great amount of subsidy in order to incentivize production of the affordable housing, and also to incentivize the demand to buy those houses. What we've done in the last almost 6 years is to change the focus so that we can privilege other options that are available in Infonavit. Contribution to new housing went from 82 to 36% because we've concentrated in other type of loans. The reform of law of 2020 helped us, for example, to buy land, to build a house. So instead of incentivizing for you to buy a new house, use the housing park, used housing or improvements. And as we've been thinking to change the mortgage credit, is to lend in a subsequent way. First, you buy for improvements in a housing that you already have, an extension or a new bathroom, a new room. But later on, you can buy land. You can buy land, and that land can be for building little by little through a loan, improvement or self-building loan, and then you start adding rooms through the improvement loans, etc. So this change of focus has allowed us to have affordable housing, not focused on having the housing demand having all through the financing system. Also, what have we done? Well, we've increased the maximum loan point each time more. We adjust our amounts that are influenced by the salary level. We've also focusing on eliminating the financing cost of operation. For example, we used to have the management quotas depending on the salary that the credits had. They had some costs, highly inefficient. Now we made a decision to eliminate it and allowed us to distribute the cost of our mortgage loans that went from 10% to 0.22. So we were able to eliminate the quotas. So the exercise of what costs associated to the loan make sense and what other costs are not efficient and are not needed anymore. The institution did like assessment of those costs through expenses execution or some other commissions of management charged by other type of portfolios. So you compensate one for the other. I would like to set as an example a bonus for the scores in order to pre-qualify and to be able to have access to the mortgage. We have this model where our customers have to have 1,000 scores based on the price and on the savings they have, the stability they have in their employment, stability that they have in their employment. Uh, so these are the different inequalities that we've seen in the labor market, making women to have lower income and unemployment episodes or greater than men. So they have a 20 scores. So for women to be able to have a mortgage credit um, better than men, and that has helped us from May of 2023 when we first implemented this policy to lower the gap between the credit given to men or to women, and this is a difference of 8.2 percentage points. Another thing with regards to what Claudia mentioned, an example of shares that makes us affordable during the 30 years of credit. It's not only to have subsidies, but to maintain the sustainability, the percentage of payment during the 30 years loan. So Infonavit, by law, it has a characteristic that any other, better than any other private bank, where we have schemes of social charges that privilege the patrimony of each individual. What's the idea about this? Well, uh, judicial actions come at a stage of the loan, for example, where we have more than 24. So this is collection, judicial collection, and the guarantee will be in effect. But before those 24 delays, we have had taken other measures. So we're on a constant basis telling the person that he is in trouble paying his monthly rates in order to avoid, and this is are the different types of social collection, the restructures. These are the more required and the key ones, because this allows uh, because if there's problem with their income, they are having problems with a monthly rate that consumes more than 30% of their salary. We restructure the loan on a permanent basis, so it has a financial relief for the rest of the time he has the debt in his mortgage. So we look for people as of the first moment when we detect there's a delay or there's a drop in their salary, to offer them all these types of options of collection. And in that way, through payments, we want to offer solutions for them not to deteriorate their loan history and to prevent them from coming to a judicial collection, because that will end up in a bad situation for them legally. So it's necessary to have take this type of actions, but just between those people who really have resigned to payment We have a social collection before coming to an administrative collection to a judicial collection. We let the people know that they have to pay. Why didn't he pay? And that's why the product was eliminated from their system. So our creditors have option of paying where they can see all the different collection actions that can be offered by Infonavit. And if they are not met, this will end up in a judicial collection. So we consider this is a type of subsidy because by Infonavit, this requires like a shot of resources, this type of social collection.
Revenue that our savers are obtaining decreases by 2.9%, since we are a mutual fund, what I said, this subsidy has a cost in terms of yield, and to maintain this social collection also has a cost that impacts the yield. And last but not least, I'd like to speak about the finance policy for adequate housing. I would like to highlight about this that since 2022, we have changed our focus on finance. We want to adhere to the principle of adequate housing. We are building adequate housing units, and we have rules for the finance of this type of housing. This is one of the first decisions that we have made. In addition to the finance part, we have to ensure that our mortgage has a good, let's say, alignment with the level of income of the recipient. Also, to foster adequate housing, we want to ensure a radius of 2.5 kilometers around the housing where there should be health services, education, supermarkets, employment sites, public transportation as well. And we designed an algorithm called urban zone consolidation. Using public data, the algorithm detects on a sort of a heat map the locations where there are employment resources, where there is public infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So we identify that heat zone, and then finances is targeted to that type of area. And if the logarithm doesn't detect or detects an area which is not within this criteria, there will be no financing for that kind of housing in that kind of area, unless the criteria established of location, employment, transportation, and services are met. And I'd also like to mention that we are working on a new uh, recovered housing strategy. The Fonavit has more than 200,000 housing units that need attention. Sometimes the units go back to the institute, but there is no profit on that until the time the unit is placed back in the market. We don't want to reinsert the house unit at the cost of a new house, but at the cost of a recovered house. That we want to do. So out of this number of housing units, we are working on them. We want to have them free of any tax or lion, no debt on water or any kind of service. We're working on the improvement of the housing unit itself so that the house or unit will be useful again, but also by tackling the root causes that led to losing this house unit. And then it had to be recovered. Losing, I mean, there was a debt on the services, etc. And also, we have to improve, of course, the road or the street where the house unit is located. We have to see that there are appropriate neighborhoods around the housing unit, etc. Well, once the housing unit is recovered, in quotation mark, it goes back to the market, not at the price of a new housing unit, but we try to reinsert it and to give it for people who have uh, an appropriate income level so that this housing unit will be maintained and used accordingly. We are also developing a quantitative proposal based on the adequate housing index concept. Perhaps I can present that a little bit in another webinar because I'm running out of time. But just to summarize, with this index, the idea is to identify the characteristics of a good habitat or housing unit to be lived in. We are based on the methodology of urban development, that is to measure the characteristics of a housing unit. And then we have quantitative data, an index, a number that will allow us to compare if a house unit is more appropriate than another one based on the number of criteria met. And then we can identify if in a given state there is a higher number of appropriate housing units or not. So this quantification is very useful to identify better what adequate housing is and act accordingly. I was asked about coordination mechanisms at federal level and at the municipality level. Well, we have started financing urban planning instruments in the municipalities. We also detect in the municipalities hot areas, or we get together with those municipalities and then we finance the development of their urban development instruments to ensure that when housing development starts in their municipalities, they will be better equipped and organized. Last but not least, I'd like to refer to the fact that we have a reform initiative also. The Institute wants to start building again. We have to build a housing park that then will be offered to the households that need housing. And that's why it would be very interesting to hear about other countries and cases here. Thank you very much for your attention and invitation. Fernando, Lore, we are a little bit behind schedule. Please, 7 minutes for questions. 7 minutes now, so we will have questions at the end.
Deficit through their lives, and this is another challenge that we didn't talk about it. It's highlighting the importance of diversify the types of solution to address the housing deficit, rather than solely focus on the acquisition of new housing. Among these solutions, it's crucial to develop rental housing products for young people, the elderly, students, and those in transitional phases, among others. Next, we will review with Fernando and some Chilean examples, and with Lorena, such as the Housing Emergency Plan, which aims to deliver 260,000 homes and prioritize the recovery of the state's role in land management, as Larissa mentioned to us, and the diversification of access to housing and the policy of fair rent. Fernando, thank you very much to being here with us, and we are really interesting to listen the Chilean examples.
Bueno, muchas gracias y buenos días a todas.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and hello to the almost 300 participants that we have today. It's great to have such a large audience. Well, this is my presentation. I am sharing the screen now. Well, I have given 10 minutes. I have been given 10 minutes, but now it is 7. Okay. I'll try to go through this as fast as possible. I have a number of slides, but I will try to focus on the key aspects. First, understand that the Chilean model has more than 4 decades. In 78, 2 instruments were created. This is the basis, the pillars of the model. On the one hand, a focus system. We focus on the poorest families. This is at the Social Development Ministry. And that year, subsidies ended in 1978. So we're talking now about 40 years with this model. The model is based on 3 pillars: savings, credits, and subsidies. Savings should be an important part of the model, and loans would be given by the state. The state was in charge of the subsidies. Then changes came. This is a message I want to convey. Public policy on housing policies have to be flexible. They evolve through time, and they evolve based on reality, and they change the policies. In the 90s, we had a big crisis in our country, a quality crisis, and also a mortgage crisis, because people were not paying back their loans, their credits. There was a high delinquency with the state. And then in the 2000, a big change came. The no debt housing concept came along. So the housing policy was amended on that basis. Always the subsidy goes to those who have more difficulties and not as much to those that do not have many possibilities to pay. And there was another key change that took place in the 2000s: decentralization and outsourcing towards the private sector. In the previous models, many things were done by the state. The state was the one who took care of the most vulnerable ones. The state called for bids for projects to the private sector so that the private sector would offer housing as they wished. And there was also a list of candidates, a single list based on some social characteristics and scores given to families and households. So as a function of that, a unit was going to be allocated. And that housing unit could be located in anywhere in the country. So this led to a crisis. Therefore, there was a crisis of exclusion, of segregation, because families were sometimes splitted and sent to another community. This led to a social crisis, and there is a lot of information about the outcomes of this crisis. I just wanted to show you with this the changes of the housing policy in Chile. And there was also a change in the way allocations were given to those who were applying for a house or a housing unit. And we have had many programs, rural programs, programs for the vulnerable ones, programs for qualitative improvement, etc. And each one of these systems had its own scoring system. And then there is this registry of the evolution of households, which is still being used. And based on this registry, you can apply for a housing unit. Now, definitions. For whom? In the past, there was a project-based selection process. Families would be grouped under a committee. They would present a project to the state. The state would approve the project and give them a subsidy to do that project. Of course, there are some conditions to be met, but the committees, well, represented those who were applying for housing solutions. And on the other hand, we have private projects. In the private sector, well, they own the land, And when they build a housing complex or something, they allocate, let's say, 25% to a certain revenue group and the other units to another, depending on their income, whether it was middle income or lower income levels. Or sometimes they would allocate the units to the families they thought were the best ones, or the ones that had the best characteristics and requirements met. Well, then another system came, Milbu Conecta. It's a system where we will go back to
We
the
have
single
to the
registry
single
system that
registration
we had in
system,
the past
and
and
then it
that
became
became
registration
the single
through
list
the application through
system.
the
But
program
now
to a
this goes
system
back to a
for the
system
families. We know
where
the families since they
we
first
will,
apply for this, and then we
let's
support them
say,
and tell them
accompany
what's
the
the
family who is applying
housing
for a
they we
list.
recommend
We will
regarding their score
advise them
and what
on
he will
how
achieve.
to apply for the housing unit.
And until
We
when
teach
they have a
them that they
specific
should
program, a
have
specific
income
housing,
to
and when
be
they
able
obtain the
to
housing.
afford the
That's
maintenance
the
of the
information
house in the
system
long
of
run,
the demand
etc.
that we
So that
called
is
Bimbo Conecta,
a
and
system
this
where
is going
we
to support
join the
the
user and
families from the
accompany the
beginning to the
user
end.
to advise the
Now
users
I
on how
will
to
go
proceed.
to
And I'm
the
going to speed up now
other
because I'm running out of
slides.
time. I like to refer to rental housing.
Fernando, please. We
Fernando,
see your two
would you
screens.
please
Can you
expand your
please just
screen
show
because
one?
we don't have a full view.
Because
Please
you
show
have
it
to project it for
in the expanded mode.
us. You
On the full
go
screen icon, you
down
can
and
click.
touch the full screen icon. Well, leave it like that because of the time.
Creo que la audiencia está muy interesada en estos programas. Sí, está igual, pero no te
Okay.
preocupes. La audiencia está muy
Don't worry.
interesada
Okay.
en los programas que están
Your
haciendo
audience
Bimbo
is
de
very
Conecta.
interested
Si
in
nos podrías
the programs
comentar
you
a
have
grandes rasgos
of
de qué se trata
renting
y cómo
housing.
lograr el
Could you
posicionamiento
please
de la
elaborate a
propiedad.
little bit about that? And how are you going to achieve 250,000 people? Well, we have several models. We see the qualitative deficit and quantitative deficit. There's a emergency list of housing plan. Today we have 12 program lines. One of them is the fair price renting. You can download the page from the ministry, and this is a national strategy. And today we have more than 122 houses finished. And the idea is to have this role of the state, how to define the projects in function of the data we have about the family, and to know if they need for a small family, elderly, or renting, or so it's a better match between what the demand and what we're going to do. Because today is so open that we don't know what we're doing, and not always we reach the right people. There's a diversification of access to housing, equipment. We have indicator system and standards of urban development that guide us where to locate the housing, also access to urban and rural housing. We want to come to remote areas where they didn't have any subsidy. The bank has been fundamental for all type of housing. We are recovering land from the armed forces, not used, not fully used, and also buildings of other public organizations because the land market is private and it's expensive. We are expropriating, and we're seeing other ways of applying a policy to the land. We expect to strengthen participation and the relationship with the citizenship.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Imágenes. Sí, sí, yo les invito
Yes, I invite you. Thank you, Fernando, very much. and we will go in depth how you're tackling this from the local point of view in Chile. And I invite you to see this initiative. Chile, in many, many times, has been a great innovator regarding housing solutions. And in these platforms that he was talking about, how to take care of the demand from the local point of view and support the families according to their specific housing needs. We are working with national records in Brazil, Chile, Mexico, and now we're also working in Panama and Ecuador. As he well mentioned, without information and real data of the housing deficit, how can we take care of them and how can we come to products design? Thank you very much, Fernando. And let's go back to Lorena. Unfortunately, we are kind of delayed and we have to listen to Lorena right now. All this information will be there. The audience will have the information. And we will have a specific webinar for renting housing and scores. I'm going to ask Maria Camila and Karian to start programming this because I believe it's quite relevant. Now we have Lorena. Lorena will talk about the experience of Chile, the municipality of Renga, and how they're implementing social projects with the local government collaboration and private actors, and how this strategy is also promoting a better urban planning, inclusive, and a linking with the existing housing. Lore, please, let's take good advantage of 7 minutes.
Pero bueno, fue
Sí,
tan rico todo lo que nos presentaron
We won't
ustedes.
have time for Q&A, but it's going to be very interesting what you have to say. Are you seeing what I'm sharing?
Sí, agrándala y ya se está
Ahí.
viendo.
Yes, we can see it very well. Yeah. Okay, I'll try to be very succinct and agile. Thank you for the invitation. It's good to have a prior context of general scenarios that Fernando addressed and the policies of existing programs. What we try to mention here is how to put in practice the housing policy. In that context, what's the role of municipalities as local governments within management of housing? And I will end up referring to the experience of a specific program in Renca, together with the Housing Ministry, that it's financed by the Ministry of Housing, but this is something that we will manage as local government. Lore, please go to the point. How are you basing this? And please refer to the practical case. We only have 5 minutes left. Yes, just to show you where is Renca. Renca, we have a quantitative deficit of 5,151 housing. This is going to be readjusted because we are having a new census. One of the first things that are relevant to talk about how are we planning our urban community is in 2022, we had a change of regulator plan. We don't have a land regulation policy that regulates for all, but the community regulation plans can provide a certain regulation that allow a development vision. But on the other hand, whenever there's an investment, we receive investment can generate a contribution to the community itself. Having said this, we update this plan in 2022 and incorporated standard incentives. When there's a new investment in the housing community, they can have certain characteristics that allow to increase the height of the project, density of projects, or the construction coefficient of projects. For that, there's three incentives. First, diversity in the price of housing. If there's a private investment and they see there's diversity in the price of housing, including people with greater vulnerability, they can have access to any of these variables: height, density, or construction coefficient.
En ciclovías o en áreas verdes.
Also, the location, near the road, near the park, etc., etc. So it is possible to increase the height, and the same goes for the case of equipment in the first floors. This is a regulator that is being put in practice. In 2022, we have two projects that are being assessed that accept the incentives. So we are seeing how this can take us to the vision that we already have of as the housing development. We in the fund have people in charge of the community housing project. And in this area, we have a sponsor that allows us not only to manage and coordinate what happens in housing in the community, but also to develop projects. In that regard, we are characters in the development of projects for the community according to the vision and the planning we have as a community. Under this, we do everything that is detailed: new collective housing, fair renting, governance with the community. We diagnose very well where the demand is and what characteristics it has. Collaboration with privates. We work with the um, uh, settlements, with the height housing that already exists in the community. So there's different roles. The important thing here is that besides managing the land, we're also managing other projects directed to profiles of deficits of housing. For example, the elderly homes who are not in the network, and the street people. That's something that it's being evaluated also. To give you a context, before leaving, for the just to say a couple of adjustments regarding Fernando was saying that the emergency plan has as a purpose to have the state again within the planning. And we say that is there in the emergency plan, but it's the state is not represented by the municipalities. And we have very little participation as local governments in the definition of guidelines of in our communities. And there's a demand that it's disconnected from the local demand. Us as local government, we propose specific value programs, and is where we have the project of the renting housing that we're working together with the Ministry of Housing. This is a project that is very well located. You see it in under green, where the civic center is, where is the municipality, and in blue, this set of buildings, 104 housing units for renting, are going to be at the service of the Renca community. The characteristic of this project is that the soil or the land is free of cost, belongs to the government, and it's free for the people. Now, the application is done by us, the municipality. We have financing through subsidies for the building of the units, and to develop the project with the cost it means, because this is industrialized housing project, we will have a loan for 30 years with the Ministry of Housing and Urbanism to develop the project. Regarding project profiles, the profile is very different than from the one that we normally work with. regarding deficit, and where we have a population of $500 average in salary. And when we mean fair price, we mean that the rent cannot overcome 25% of the income of families. This is a project that we will manage during at least the next 30 years as a municipality. First time we undertake this challenge. And in another webinar, we can address and talk about all the problems and challenges and questions that we permanently do regarding this new experience. Great. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you very much. Well, this has been many topics that once we added in this webinar, all very interested. Now, with regards of July 25, we will have a greater space because to talk about renting housing, because this is something being talked about in different countries. What Fernando and Lorena just introduced has been very interesting. I see several questions from the auditory, and thanks to the time we have, they are pretty much related with things on how to promote the scores and this type of subsidies for supply and demand, like the ones that were presented by Marja and Claudia. Examples of diversification of financing, the balance and backtesting, as well as the cross subsidies and special focus to vulnerable population, urban consolidation programs, and how to do this, the deficit, the housing deficit, being more specific with what Fernando told about us, and practical cases of local governments. I believe that this has been a extraordinary panel with international experiences of Marja and Claudia, with experiences in the local in Mexico and Chile through Fernando Lorena. And these questions, I invite our attendees to come in contact with us, and we will send you the questions to the speakers for them to have much more time to answer the questions. I would like then in 1 minute, if someone of the panelists would like to have a final message, you're welcome. Marja, we would like to give us a final message.
Yeah, very quickly. I think flexibility at the local government level, granted by the central institutions that sit on the subsidy funds, is critical. The most successful program in the United States, but also in other countries I work with, are the block grants or the flexible programs where local governments really can design what types of programs they want and how to interface with central government in a way that also makes the local government not put in too much of their own funding, which might be a constraint when they move to rental housing, for instance, or
Excellent.
other. So that's my one tip.
Flexibility. Excellent. Any other that wants to make the final appointment? Yes, Fernando.
Sí, yo creo que es fundamental lo de la flexibilidad que
Yeah, flexibility is fundamental, but also to have a clear idea that the ideal is to have diversity of options for families, because that means data and means to work with the state, with the municipalities, with all decentralized levels, the community, and without any doubt, the private sector to develop the project. Okay, thank you very much. We have flexibility, public, social, and private sector, and is this was too much information, the one we had, and diverse information that can give us some ideas to advance in housing deficit attention. I would like to thank all you, the wonderful panelists, for your valuable collaborations. Without any doubt, your experience has been fundamental for the success of the webinar, and we always thank our attendees for their active participation in questions. Today we have discussed about the subsidies program well designed. How can they contribute to improve the quality of housing? And we've also talked about the importance of have back testing and design according to the specific needs of the countries. We saw many ideas from different products. I love that part by the supply and demand, different incentives needed for programs from the national and local point of view to take care of the housing deficit. Larissa presented the Infonavit example. Fernando talked about the Chilean case from the Ministry of Housing and Urbanism, and Lore from the municipality point of view. And Margie and Claudia, global and international perspective is fundamental that all actors in the value chain of housing participate in this care of housing deficit. And today, sadly, we came to the end of our series of webinars. I want to thank Maria Karin and for having carried out the 3 webinars, the strategies to promote social housing in Latin American Caribbean cities. It's been an honor to participate and learn from all of you. Don't forget to fill the feedback survey. Your comments are very important for us. There's on the screen the QR code to have more information and see it in the chat. And finally, to thank all of you for being here with us. You can be in contact with the IDB team for any further question, and we'll meet again in July 25 in the under the International Housing Forum, where will be talking about in detail the topics discussed in the webinar. Thank you for your participation and your time, and I wish you a wonderful day. Thank you very much.